By the time Lorisiac realized the danger he was in, the British Expeditionary Force, under Field Marshal Sir John French, had reached the Maubeuge-le-Cateau area on the Allied left. For once in British history, an army was taking to the field with great efficiency. 1,800 special trains had carried them to their ports of embarkation. On one day alone, 80 trains ran into Southampton docks.
It's a long, long way to the forest, because my heart is free.
An average of 50,000 tons of shipping per day, safe and unhindered under the protection of the Royal Navy, carried the Expeditionary Force to France. Landings in France began in deep secrecy on 7 August. Field Marshal Lord Kitchener, who had been appointed Secretary of State for War on 5 August, feared that the forward concentration of his army might lead to the BEF being overwhelmed by the German forces massing north of the Meuse. He could not change the assembly area, but the perceived threat of a German invasion caused him to delay the embarkation of 2 regular divisions. Thus, at the start of the campaign, volatile Sir John French only had 4 divisions and 1 cavalry division on hand. His problems and his temper worsened when the commander of Second Corps, Grierson, suffered a fatal heart attack, and Kitchener chose to replace him with General Sir Horace Smith Dorrien, whose relations with French had long been tense. After an otherwise smooth assembly, the BEF moved up into the industrial region near Mons on 22 August. There they expected to participate in an Allied offensive into Belgium. Instead, it speedily became evident that the BEF was directly in the path of the German First Army, 750,000 men sweeping down from the northeast after Lorisac's failure to stop them on the Sambre. Each day, the Royal Flying Corps would fly its recon. Some flights would find nothing, but one scouting over the old battlefield of Waterloo was more fortunate.
We found the whole area completely covered with hordes of field grey uniforms and heavy stuff, transport, guns, and what have you, coming towards us. In fact, it looked as though the place was alive with the Germans.
Returning to base, the pilot was rushed off to Sir John French to tell him what he'd seen.
And I showed him a map all marked out. He said, "Have you been over that area?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And I explained what I'd seen, and they were enormously interested. And then they began reading the figures that I'd estimated, whereupon I seemed to feel that their interest faded. They seemed to look at each other and shrug their shoulders. And then French turned round to me and said, "Now, yes, my boy, this is terribly interesting, but tell me all about an airplane. What can you do when you're in these machines? Aren't they very dangerous? Are they very cold? Can you see anything? What do you do if your engine stops?" and all that sort of stuff. And I couldn't bring him back to earth, because obviously he wasn't interested. And then I again tried, and he looked at me and he said, "Yes, this is very interesting what you've got, but you know, our information, which of course is correct, proves that you really, I don't think you could really have seen as much as you think. Well, of course, I quite understand, you may imagine you have, but it's not the case."
Despite his exposed position and the onrushing German army, Sir John promised to cover Lorisac's left by standing at Mons for 24 hours. There would be no grand offensive. The British army was digging in. Second Corps, manned the line on the Mont-Condé Canal and a small salient around the town, while Lieutenant General Sir Douglas Haig's First Corps was to its right. For a time, Kloek was ignorant of the British deployment across his axis of advance. During the misty morning of Sunday, 23 August, Kloek's leading corps ran headlong into the BEF position.
Quite suddenly, out of the blue, we saw cavalry coming towards us. They'd come out of the right on our right flank. I said, good gracious, it's Germans. So we immediately started to fire. We fired fuse north, and they got about 300 yards, I suppose, from the guns, and they wouldn't face it.
By 9 o'clock, both sides were having at it. The Germans made a succession of piecemeal, badly coordinated assaults against Smith-Dorrien's position in the salient and along the canal. The British quickly became acquainted with the power and accuracy of German artillery.
We were in the trenches waiting for them, but we didn't expect anything like the smashing blow that struck us. All at once the sky began to rain down bullets and shells. I saw shells bursting to right and left of me, and I saw many a good comrade go out.
Then German infantry came forward in solid square blocks, surging towards the canal and its crossings. The BEF's incomparable musketry roared to life, exacting a terrible toll from the dense German formations.
They were in solid square blocks, standing out sharply against the skyline, and you couldn't help hitting them. We lay in our trenches with not a sound or sign. They crept nearer and nearer, and then our officers gave the word. The Germans seemed to stagger like a drunk man suddenly hit between the eyes, after which they made a run for us, shouting some outlandish cry that we couldn't make out.
Poor devils of infantry. They advanced in companies of quite 150 men in files 5 deep. The first company was simply blasted away to heaven by a volley at 700 yards, and in their insane formation, every bullet was almost sure to find 2 billets. They had absolutely no chance.
This was a mad minute. 15 rounds of aimed rifle fire that the British infantry alone was trained to do. At Mons, it did the trick. The Germans were shot flat.
Our first battle is a heavy, an unheard of heavy defeat. And against the English we laughed at.
Well entrenched and completely hidden, the enemy opened a murderous fire. The casualties increased, the rushes became shorter. With bloody losses, the attack gradually came to an end.
It was all to no avail. On the left flank, German pressure began to build. The French Fifth Army was falling back, exposing the British flanks. Although Haig's First Corps was not heavily pressed, Smith-Dorrien's troops largely held on until late in the afternoon, when relentless German pressure and numerical superiority finally broke the Tommies. Orders were issued to fall back. The retreat from Mons had begun.
We were very disappointed when we got the order that we have to break off battle and retreat. To do this is not an easy thing. It's quite easy to join battle, but it's not easy to break it off. However, we put down a curtain fire between us and the Germans, which enabled the infantry and cavalry to get away.
After all the tricks of the trade from their experience of small wars, the English veterans brilliantly understood how to slip off at the last moment.
Accordingly, First Corps fell back about 2 miles to pre-selected positions. The BEF had performed well in its first important battle, keeping Kloek's First Army at bay for the best part of the day. Most of the 1,600 British casualties were in Second Corps. On came the Germans. The Schlieffen Plan was still on time and target. That night, the threat to the French Fifth Army's right near Dinant prompted Lanrezac to withdraw without consulting Joffre or the British. The BEF had no alternative but to conform with Longrezac. The whole Allied line was in retreat, and thousands of frightened, homeless people joined the armies on the roads west.